front office insider and cap savant Bobby Marks to the show. Bobby, welcome. And you brought us some breaking news, please, before we move on. Talk to us about Kawhi and the Clippers.
Rachel, Kawhi Leonard drama part 2
yes.
is now over. We do not have to worry about Kawhi Leonard not going back to the Clippers. I talked to multiple people close to the organization today, and they gave me a 100% guarantee that Leonard will be in a Clipper uniform, well, at least rehabbing in a Clipper uniform next year. And I think the big thing now is just kind of working out what the contract's going to be. If it's going to be one of those 2-year contracts where Leonard can become a free agent again next offseason to sign that $240+ million contract, or if it's going to be a 4-year, $175 million contract. But they told me that they've been in contact with Leonard throughout this whole process, that there was never a doubt that he was not coming back. And I think, Rachel, we saw the market kind of dictate that when teams like New York went out and used cap space, when the Heat went out and got Kyle Lowry, that it's a little bit different than 2019 when free agency was totally frozen.
Yeah, I mean, look, the fact that we didn't have the helicopter chasing a car and an SUV and the fans waiting outside of a hotel in case the meeting was there kind of speaks to the fact that most people thought this was a done deal, which is why most other teams spent that cap room. But then, of course, as the days dragged on, I know there are Clippers fans who have been a little bit nervous here. And 100% assurance, Bobby, that is some serious news. So we really appreciate that. I had to, though, bring back this flow chart that you wrote and posted at the beginning of free agency. We put it on the show that day.
Impressive.
You just did this like in a conference room for yourself, right?
Oh, yeah. I was actually locked in a conference room by myself. There was nobody. There were windows there. And that was we hadn't even gotten to free agency yet. So you imagine what I can do right now with about 4 hours sleep. So, yeah, and that was basically, we showed how Kyle Lowry dictated free agency. And it all lined up as far as Kyle's move to Miami and how all the other pieces kind of fell in place.
Well, from that flow chart, the other storylines that flow are, we're talking about, right, some of the biggest storylines between the season begins. You have got the Dame Lillard situation going on in
right now. This would definitely be a trio to be reckoned with.
LeBron James delivering AD dynamite.
Westbrook, he just doesn't stop.
I'm a champion, I need some trophy.
Welcome back to The Jump. I'm Rachel Nichols, still with NBA champ Matt Barnes, Hall of Famer Jackie McMullen. We wanted to take a deeper dive, guys, into the new look Lakers with that fabulous game we call Jump Ball Lakers Edition. All right, first, who will average more assists next season, Russ or LeBron? In each of the last 4 seasons, just a little background here, either Russ or LeBron have led the NBA in assists, but now they're teammates, Matt. So who's going to get it this next year?
I think it'll be LeBron only because he needs these younger guys who are younger than him to kind of carry the load throughout the season. You know, this is going to be a marathon for this team. I think they know it. Although most guys will defer to LeBron, I see LeBron leading this team in assists because he's going to need these guys throughout the regular season.
All right, I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go Russ. You know, one thing we know about Russ, when he gets into the paint, he is good at anybody in the league is distributing the ball once he gets in there. Imagine how many times he's going to be in the paint and can dish it to Anthony Davis for a jam. I'm taking Russ. I think Russ wants to fit in, wants to make this work, and there's no better way to do that than to distribute dimes all over the floor.
Yeah, and he's talked about wanting to leave the impression that he's a good teammate here, and the idea that he's giving assists, dishing to his teammates, passing. I think that will be a big focus of his in the first month or two, just to establish himself with these Lakers. So I'm tipping into Jackie's side, of the fence. Next, I want to ask you guys about crunch time minutes. You think that the Lakers vets or their youth will end up being used more in crunch time? Because the Lakers did, of course, add several veterans. You've seen all the headlines and ages and graphs and charts. Carmelo Anthony, Dwight Howard, Trevor Ariza. But they did also add some youth guys. The backcourt, Kendrick Nunn, Malik Monk was just a huge steal for them. They re-signed Talen Horton-Tucker, who, of course, they've invested a ton in over the years. So, Matt, when we get to the end of games, particularly in the playoffs, who do you think will get the bulk of the minutes, the older vets or the future?
It's going to be depending on injury and then how the younger players play throughout the season. I mean, you know, as an older player, you understand it's not really about who starts the game. It's about who finishes the game. That's who the coach trusts the most. So, I mean, that's going to depend on a lot of injuries and then the development of these younger guys, which I think the younger guys are going to be called upon a lot this year because this team is a little older. Again, if this is the team they had 10 years ago, we'd be talking about this is one of the greatest teams ever put together. But this team is a little bit older. I'm not holding that against them. I just think it's going to take their youth is going to get a good run and a great experience during the regular season, and hopefully that'll bode well for them in the playoffs.
Well, so here's the question. If the youth gets that good run, can they be consistent? Because you know how it is with LeBron. When it gets down to crunch time, he needs to look over at you and say, I believe in you and I trust you. And my instinct tells me that it's going to be the vets to start. Now, maybe a guy like Malik Monk, whose three-point shooting went up to 40% this past season, really got a hot hand with Charlotte. If he can prove he can do that to LeBron, LeBron's going to tell Frank Vogel, I want him in the game.
Right.
But I think in the early going, at least, it's gonna start out being those vets.
Yep.
All right, one last one. You guys talked about Brooklyn being the favorite over in the Eastern Conference in the last segment, so let's take it a step further. More likely to make the NBA Finals, the Lakers or the Nets, because they're the favorites in their respective conferences, according to Caesars Sportsbook. But those conferences are very different paths to an NBA Final. So, Jackie, for you, which team would be more likely to make it to the championship round?
So my instincts tells me I want to say the Lakers because I think they'll have an easier path to the NBA Finals out of the West than the Nets would in the East. But I just got to say this. The Nets, completely healthy, are one of the most talented teams I think we will ever see. So I guess I'm not going away from Brooklyn.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like this question. These are my two that I picked to be in the finals, but I agree with you, Jackie. They're one long toenail away from going to the finals and possibly winning the finals with just KD healthy.
Right.
This team, we're talking about there's no dynasty. This team can be the next dynasty if they're able to stay healthy. Although I think, losing someone like Jeff Green doesn't sound like a big deal, but he was an integral part of that team. So hopefully they can find someone who replaces his energy and what he brought to the team. But I think this team is going to have a chip on their shoulder this year after what happened last year with injuries and all this chatter about what's going on. So I'm picking the Nets as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, that toenail, right? That Kevin Durant foot in the second round, that will be remembered for a long time. It's interesting, though, Jackie, that even part of your logic was the Lakers might have an easier path. That kind of answers the question from the previous segment about how strong the East is this year versus the West, because we just wouldn't have said easier path in the West in previous recent seasons.
Right.
All right, Jackie, we're going to give you a segment off. Don't go too far, though. You'll be back later in the show. And coming up, Bobby Marks is going to join us to do a little capology and look ahead to the biggest storylines remaining this offseason. Will Dame, Beal, Simmons be moved? Bobby's got all the answers.
Off the rip, I think the Lakers, Bulls, and Heat all did a great job. All addressed issues. We talked last week, and I want to say the Lakers only had 3 guys under contract, and now they have a full team. And if this was 10 years ago, we'd be arguing this is the greatest team ever assembled. So I love what the Lakers have done. I love what Miami's done addressing their needs and being able to sign Victor Oladipo. And then I like what Chicago did. So those are my winners.
So, Matt, I'm going to focus on the Miami Heat as the winner for me. The sweepstakes, if you want to call them that in free agency, it all revolved around Kyle Lowry. They not only landed Kyle Lowry, they poached PJ Tucker. And I'm always happy if it's my team, if I have a Morris on it. In this case, they got a Marquis. And I just think when you look at this roster, there's a lot of toughness, a lot of veteran presence. And you mentioned Oladipo, and I'm with you on this. If I were the Heat and I'm looking at Victor Oladipo, I'm thinking, I'd like to have him back, but I don't want to spend a lot of money on him. And guess what? They didn't have to.
They didn't have to.
Yep.
Absolutely. I mean, he is still working his way back from yet another injury. I like your Morris point, Jackie. I'm wondering sometimes if there's like a third secret Morris triplet out there so that more teams could have a little Morris in their life. We haven't identified.
There's some
one
Barnes twins
yet.
on the way as well.
Yes, there are, and they're shooters too.
Yes.
All right, let's flip to the other side. Jackie, which team's offseason concerned you the most?
I didn't really love, Rachel, what the New Orleans Pelicans did, and I think that's in part because I'm a big Lonzo Ball fan, and I really feel that all that Lonzo needed was a chance to be in one place and to start building the team that included him. He's not a guy that needs the ball a lot. They moved on from Lonzo Ball, and I understand what they were trying to do. They were swinging for the fences. They were trying to get Chris Paul. They were trying to get Kyle Lowry. They got neither. They ended up giving up 2 first-round picks in all their transactions. They come back with Devontae Graham. I like Devontae Graham, but you lose Lonzo Ball. Have you surrounded young Zion Williamson with a team that is immeasurably better by these moves? I think not, and it still cost you 2 first-round draft picks.
I would agree, Jack. Yeah, I really feel like they didn't do anything thus far. Again, it's still, 5 days early, and I think sometimes these middle